I grew up in the community theater in my town of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. This is me doing a clown routine. You can't see it well in this picture, but I had to wear mismatched shoes for this. And so every time we performed this, I would fall on my face at some point during and all the kids that we were performing this for, they thought it was the funniest thing ever, that it was all planned. And of course, all of my theater friends who were there with me would come up afterwards and go, "Are you okay? Did you hurt yourself this time?" So one of the things that you learn very early on when you are a theater kid is that even if you always want to be in the front and you always want to be the star of the show, you can't be. Like I said, theater kids, we want to be, but we can't be. In fact, the great majority of all the parts in a play or in a production are going to be the bit parts, right? Your name is going to appear more often down at the bottom of the playbill than it is at the top of the playbill. And you have to learn. In fact, there's a famous quote that says that there are no small roles, only small actors. And you have to learn as a theater kid to pour yourself into, to go to rehearsals, even for those small roles. And I can tell you, I had a few of those small roles in my time. I did indeed once play the part of Space Panda 2. Not even a human, not even Space Panda 1. No, I was Space Panda 2. I had one line in the entire play. It was, "You go there." It's my big moment in the spotlight for that play, which was better than another play I was in where I did not even get a line. I was Old Street Woman. And Old Street Woman was mugged in the first act of the play and never seen or heard from again. So I came out like 10 minutes into the production, got mugged, and I was done for the night. I think the part that finally told me that maybe theater was not in my future was when at 17 years old, I landed the part of Fat Man, which can really, it's not good for a 17-year-old girl's ego. And it was because during the auditions, I laughed the loudest of anyone during the audition. So they were like, "Oh, well, she'll make a perfect fat man. Oh, thank you so very much," right? Well, in the Bible, there are big parts and there are bit parts. Jesus, Moses, Noah. From there, things get a little muddier. The Gospels can't even agree on the names of the 12 disciples. Is it Bartholomew or Nathaniel or Thaddeus or the other guy named Judas? There are at least 5 guys in the Bible whose name is James. And trying to keep them straight is a puzzle. There are probably 7 women in the Bible whose name is Mary. And in today's passage, we meet the 70 other guys. They don't even get names. They're just the other guys that get sent out. In fact, their story is only recorded in the Gospel of Luke. Yet, just like in the theater that there are no small parts, in the Bible, we also know that there's no small parts. Like the 70 other guys, you and I are not likely going to be at the top of the church's playbill, right? We're not going to go down in church history like William and Catherine Booth or John Wesley. We're not going to write any deep theological treatises like N.T. Wright or even a best-selling devotional like Max Lucado. But the good news is that just like those 70 other guys, your and my contribution to the kingdom is no less important or precious in God's sight. The words of Jesus to the 70 are just as true for us today as they were when he told them. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out his workers into the field. Go. God is calling for workers in his kingdom. And God's got enough work for all of us. The calling of the other guys certainly illustrates that God's calling went out to more than 12 guys. That God's calling is much more expansive and inclusive than any of our assumptions of that calling. God, love this picture of William Booth, is calling you. Right? Social scientists, how many of you have ever heard the 80-20 principle? Yeah, social scientists, they talk about the 80-20 principle, and that's basically 80% of the people are just kind of waiting for a job, is kind of the 80-20 principle. If you're in an emergency situation, they say 10% of people will freeze. They won't know what to do, and they'll just freeze. There will be 10% of the people who will know what to do and will jump in and help. And then there will be 20% of us with our cell phones. Right? Just recording for posterity the emergency that is about to go down. The same can be said in the church, right? That there is a small group in the church of Holy Spirit empowered people. And then there are people who believe that they have nothing to contribute. They rationalize that God is certainly not calling them, and they either freeze where they are or they walk away. They have taken themselves out of the calling. But the majority, 80%, are like that crowd with their cell phones videotaping the unfolding emergency. They recognize the problem, but they can't see themselves as a solution. They might have heard Jesus say, go, but they have failed to heed the instructions ahead of time. Note that before Jesus says go, he sends out the 70 by 2. This might be the reason why half of our Bibles read 72 instead of 70, because the Greek, even in the oldest manuscripts, disagrees. Some of the oldest manuscripts say 70 by 2 in pairs, and some say 72 in pairs. In other words, some Greek manuscripts actually reiterate the fact that the other guys were not supposed to go alone. Jesus intends for us to do this work in community. The church is a group project. It cannot be done alone, and yet among church leaders, both lay and professional, loneliness and isolation are common. Even in the Salvation Army, we sing about God's soldier. God's soldier has to stand alone, right? We sing that. Accepting burdens not his own. A lonely work he cannot shirk, where dark and deadly dangers lurk. While we often find ourselves standing alone, God's plan is for us to stand together. In fact, I chose this picture knowingly because we are not a together group, right? Like, there's a dog jumping up, there's a couple of people yelling at a kid in the front, right? But God's plan is for us to do this thing together, even as messed up people. The Apostle Paul was one of those big names we mentioned in the Bible. Right? If you notice, Paul did most of his work as a part of a team. If you look closely, Paul rarely did his work alone. Some of his companions are common names that you and I recognize. Timothy, Luke. Some of them a little less common. Silas, John Mark, Barnabas. And then comes the names at the bottom of the list where you are like, is that even in the Bible? Epaphras from Colossians 1:7. Or this famous list from Acts 24. Sopater, Aristarchus, right? Secundus. He had such a name that like his mama didn't even name him firstest. He's Secundus, he's second. Gaius and Tychicus. You see, sometimes we assume that God's calling only rests on the big names. That God's calling is just for leaders and apostles, for officers, people with red on their shoulders, but that's not true. God's calling rests on us together. That every teacher, every leader needs people alongside them. Needs folks for support and encouragement, that this work cannot be done alone. Moreover, look closely at the first priority that Jesus gives to the 70 other guys. Before Jesus tells them to go, what does he tell them? Pray. Jesus says pray. I love the Message version of this. The Message Bible says, what a huge harvest. And yet, so few harvest hands. So, get on your knees. Isn't that a great translation? We must be careful to seek God's will before we go off and do God's work. The Salvationist holiness teacher and leader, Samuel Logan Bringle, wrote that we have to sharpen the axe before we go chopping wood. And I'm guessing, like paper airplanes, most of us have not chopped wood lately, right? So I would like to change Samuel Logan Bringle's statement to, we need to read the directions before we assemble the IKEA. Like, if you go to IKEA and you go to the warehouse to pick up your boxes, what does it say right on the box? Lift as a team. IKEA doesn't want you to take your furniture alone. So now you get your furniture home, hopefully with the help of a friend, and then you open the box, and what's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is you look for the instructions, right? You got to find that little book. The second thing I look for is the little bag of tools, right? You got to have like your little bag of tools. And then, this is great, if you still have issues putting it together, IKEA now says you just have to pick up the phone and call them. Now, if this is the right way to put together a bookshelf, how much more important is it when we assemble the people of God? You see, Jesus has instructed us to work as a team. God has provided us a book of instructions. And God has promised us a package of parts he calls the spiritual gifts that are designed to hold us together and help us grow. And in addition to all of that, God, through Holy Spirit, provides 24/7 support service. He is our advocate, our helper, our comforter, and our guide. The point of the matter is, God has already provided the disciples with everything they need to successfully complete and carry out his mission. Jesus is so confident that he instructs the 70 in verse 4, do not take a purse or sandals or a bag. It is surprising that Jesus does not include a big stick, because in the verse just before this, what does he say? I'm sending you out like sheep among the wolves. Be assured, please, that the promise of John 6:39 stands. And this is the will of God, that I should not lose even one of those he has given me, but that I should rise them up on the last day. God is not setting us up for failure. God does warn us that the life of a disciple, the life of radical faith, is not easy. Jesus assures us that we have everything Jesus assuring us that we have everything we need is not the same as Jesus guaranteeing an easy or uncomplicated life. We will have trials as God's disciples. We will experience difficulties as God's disciples. We will come up against opposition. There will be times that our message will bring joy. Also, there will be times when we are ignored and times where we will be met with hostility. Our job is not to control the message, but to rely in faith on the one who gave us that message. And when we follow the instruction of Jesus and venture out with his message into the world, something amazing happens. I love how this story ends. They returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. And Jesus replies, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. However, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your name is written in heaven. Having gone out with nothing but each other, they return with praise on their lips and power in their soul. It strikes me that in this sermon series where we're talking about nameless people, that Jesus says to these 70 other guys whose name we don't know, don't rejoice at all the great things you see. Don't rejoice that the demons are fleeing. Don't rejoice in the people. Don't rejoice in that. Rejoice rather that your name is recorded in glory. See, I don't know who else besides me in this room had dreams of their name being up in lights or at the top of a playbill. No. But I do know that being known is a basic human need. Everyone longs for someone to know their name. We all want our name to mean something. And so the story of the 70 other guys concludes with the only real, meaningful measurement in that regard. Not how many people know our names here on earth, not how famous or beloved we might be, but if our names are recorded in heaven. As we sing song number 565 tonight, think about these words. All I once held dear, built my life upon. All this world reveres and wars to own. All I once thought gain, I have counted loss, spent and worthless now, compared to this. And what is this? Knowing you, Jesus. Knowing you. There is no greater thing.